And then, as previously discussed, the IMF would arrive, imposing its stringent structural adjustment conditions. The entire chain was inextricably linked. For America, the benefits were extraordinary and, for the most part, simply taken for granted. Running a trade deficit does not weaken a nation when its currency is the indispensable medium everyone else requires. Other countries diligently manufacture goods, sell them to America, and receive dollars in return. These dollars do not immediately return home. Instead, they remain in foreign central banks as vital reserve assets. This meant America received tangible goods, televisions, cars, clothing, electronics, and, in exchange, merely issued paper. Pieces of paper backed by the assurance that they would be essential for buying oil. The economist Barry Eichengreen estimated that the dollar's reserve status alone saves America somewhere between $40 billion and $70 billion annually in interest costs, though other estimates suggest far higher figures. While the precise figure is debated, the direction is unequivocally clear. America borrows more cheaply, spends more freely, and consumes more than it produces because the rest of the world has an enduring need for its currency. The staggering $38 trillion in U.S. debt that often appears alarming is, in fact, partly sustainable precisely because there is a structural global demand for U.S. Treasury bonds, a demand that simply does not exist for any other country's debt. This is what French politicians truly meant when they lamented America's exorbitant privilege. America gets to wield the world's reserve currency, reap the immense benefits of that status, and maintain it primarily through military arrangements rather than through stringent economic discipline. For 5 decades, this intricate system held firm, creaking occasionally, questioned periodically, yet fundamentally enduring. That is, until recently. And unlike gold, which existed in fixed quantities, this oil arrangement was enforced not by the immutable laws of chemistry, but by the overwhelming might of the United States military, strategically positioned throughout the Persian Gulf region specifically to ensure stability, which, in this context, meant ensuring the uninterrupted continuation of the arrangement. The consequences of petrodollar recycling were immense, yet largely invisible to ordinary citizens. Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states began accumulating staggering dollar surpluses from their oil revenues. They then invested these surpluses predominantly in U.S. Treasury bonds. This created a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle. America purchased oil from the Gulf in dollars, and the Gulf recycled those dollars straight back into American debt. This mechanism kept American interest rates significantly lower than they would otherwise have been, enabling the U.S. government to borrow far more cheaply than any other government on Earth, and crucially, financed American consumption and military spending on a scale that would otherwise have been utterly impossible. However, this system also harbored a darker side for the developing world. Any country aspiring to industrialize, to build factories, run machines, and uplift its populace, needed to buy oil. To purchase oil, it required dollars. To acquire dollars, it either had to export goods to America or borrow dollars from international banks. If it borrowed dollars and interest rates subsequently rose, which they did dramatically under Paul Volcker in 1979, it faced an inevitable debt crisis. The petrodollar system thus transformed dollar dependency into a perilous trap for poorer nations. They had no genuine alternative. Oil was priced in dollars, dollars originated from America, and America set the interest rates. When those rates surged, developing nations teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. Second, Saudi Arabia pledged to invest its surplus oil revenues, the accumulating petrodollars, primarily in U.S. Treasury bonds. In essence, it would utilize its immense oil wealth to finance American government debt. In exchange for these profound concessions, the United States offered Saudi Arabia robust military protection, an unwavering security guarantee, comprehensive weapon sales, and unreserved political support. The United States would safeguard the Saudi monarchy from external threats and, implicitly, from internal challenges as well. The House of Saud's military would be equipped with advanced American weaponry, and American forces would be stationed strategically throughout the region. Other OPEC nations soon joined this innovative arrangement. Within a few short years, virtually all global oil was priced in dollars. This was the petrodollar system, a stroke of geopolitical genius that, remarkably, most people have never even heard of. Consider for a moment what this system achieved. If every country in the world required oil, and oil could only be purchased in dollars, then every country in the world would require dollars, perpetually. Without oil, farms would cease to produce, goods would stop moving, and military forces would grind to a halt. Consequently, every government on Earth needed to maintain substantial dollar reserves to guarantee its capacity to purchase vital energy. This fundamental arrangement replaced the gold backing of the dollar with something far more durable and undeniably more powerful. Gold is inert. One can, in theory, survive without it. However, a modern economy cannot function without oil. The dollar was no longer supported by a mere metal. It was backed by the indispensable commodity of industrial civilization. And then came Henry Kissinger, whose strategic acumen, coupled with a momentous decision, not only saved the dollar's dominance, but replaced gold with something far more potent: black gold. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo occurred. OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, spearheaded by Saudi Arabia, initiated a devastating cutoff of oil supplies to nations that had supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Oil prices quadrupled almost overnight, sending shockwaves through the global economy. The embargo starkly revealed a truth that American strategists had anticipated, though not fully resolved. Oil had irrevocably become the central commodity of industrial civilization. Every modern economy depended on it. Every military machine required it. Whoever controlled oil pricing held the reins of economic life for every nation on Earth. Saudi Arabia was the pivotal swing producer. It possessed more oil reserves than any other nation and greater spare production capacity. What Saudi Arabia decided regarding oil production fundamentally determined the global oil price. This elevated Saudi Arabia to the status of the most strategically important nation in the Middle East, and indeed, one of the most critical on the planet. Nixon and Kissinger made a decisive strategic calculation. They would re-anchor the dollar to oil, much as it had once been tethered to gold. In 1974, Treasury Secretary William Simon embarked on a confidential mission to Saudi Arabia, where he negotiated a secret agreement. The intricate details of this arrangement remained classified for decades, only receiving official confirmation when pertinent documents were declassified years later. The agreement had two crucial core elements. First, Saudi Arabia committed to pricing its oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. All Saudi oil sales to every country in the world would henceforth be conducted solely in dollars. No other currency would be accepted. De Gaulle famously denounced the dollar's reserve status as an extraordinary privilege and, in a symbolic gesture, even dispatched the French Navy to collect France's gold from American vaults. Other countries, observing France's actions, began to follow suit. American gold reserves started to drain rapidly. By August 1971, the underlying mathematics had become unsustainable. America held approximately $10 billion in gold, yet foreign governments collectively possessed over $80 billion in dollars, and their interest in exchanging these for gold was growing exponentially. Richard Nixon was faced with a stark choice: honor the Bretton Woods commitment and entirely exhaust America's gold reserves, or unilaterally break the promise and terminate dollar convertibility. On the evening of August 15, 1971, Nixon appeared on television to announce that the United States would no longer exchange dollars for gold. Just like that, without any international negotiation, without a multilateral agreement, and without consulting any of the 44 nations that had originally signed the Bretton Woods agreements, America unilaterally brought an end to the system around which the world had built its economy. Nixon's Treasury Secretary, John Connally, perfectly encapsulated the prevailing American attitude when he infamously told a group of European finance ministers, "The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem." Logically, this drastic action should have spelt the end of the dollar's dominance. If dollars were no longer backed by gold, why would any nation continue to hold them as a reserve currency? If America could simply print money without any intrinsic constraint, what would guarantee the dollar's value? Several European nations immediately began exploring pathways towards a new international monetary order. The dollar plummeted sharply, and gold prices surged. It seemed as though American financial hegemony was about to crumble. Europe rebuilt. Japan reconstructed its economy. International trade expanded significantly, and the dollar enjoyed widespread trust due to its gold backing and America's vast reserves. Currencies remained stable, creating the conditions for what Europeans would later fondly recall as the Trente Glorieuses, the 30 glorious years of post-war prosperity. However, a fundamental structural flaw was embedded within the Bretton Woods system from its very inception. This flaw was astutely identified by Robert Triffin in 1960 and subsequently became known as the Triffin Dilemma. It elegantly explains why the system was, in fact, always destined to collapse. Herein lay the core problem. If the dollar was to function as the world's reserve currency, then the world necessarily required dollars to facilitate trade. The only viable mechanism for circulating these dollars throughout the global economy was for America to persistently run trade deficits, to import more than it exported, to spend more abroad than it earned. The dollars America disbursed overseas would then accumulate in foreign central banks as essential reserves. This was the means by which the world gained the liquidity it required to function. But here was the dilemma. If America consistently ran persistent trade deficits, eventually the rest of the world would accumulate more dollars than America possessed in gold to back them. By the late 1960s, the Triffin Dilemma had escalated into a full-blown crisis. America had simultaneously incurred colossal expenses fighting the Vietnam War and funding Lyndon Johnson's ambitious Great Society programs, a classic case of pursuing guns and butter without commensurate tax increases. Dollars were flooding the world. France, under the leadership of Charles de Gaulle, deeply suspicious of American financial dominance, began converting its dollar reserves into gold. White's alternative proposal was far simpler and immeasurably more advantageous to the United States. Every currency in the world would be pegged to the US dollar. Countries would fix their exchange rates directly to the dollar, and the dollar itself would, in turn, be pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Any country holding dollars would possess the right to exchange them for gold. In essence, the dollar would be as good as gold, indeed, arguably better, as dollars could actively be used for trade while physical gold remained inert in vaults. Keynes immediately grasped the profound implications of this arrangement. He famously remarked that accepting this proposal was tantamount to handing the United States an exorbitant privilege. When a nation's currency becomes the world's reserve currency, and every other country requires it to conduct international trade, that nation gains extraordinary powers. It can print money and effectively export its inflation. It can sustain trade deficits indefinitely, knowing that other countries will always need its currency. It can borrow money remarkably cheaply, as there is an almost unlimited global demand for its debt. This allows it to consume far more than it produces, perpetually, with the rest of the world effectively financing this imbalance. Keynes vehemently argued against this system, but America possessed the gold, the factories, and the military might. The smaller nations, lacking any meaningful leverage, had no real alternative but to accept White's proposal. Thus, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, was created to oversee the system, the World Bank established to finance post-war reconstruction, and the U.S. dollar, by design and through negotiation at that New Hampshire resort hotel while the war still raged, became the undisputed backbone of the entire global economy. For approximately 25 years, this system operated with remarkable efficacy. The Soviet Union had suffered catastrophic losses, with 27 million lives extinguished and an enormous proportion of its productive capacity destroyed. The venerable old order of European imperial power was, quite simply, finished. America, however, stood apart. Its territory had remained untouched by bombs, its factories unblemished by destruction. Indeed, its industrial base had been operating at maximum capacity for 4 relentless years, churning out an endless supply of weapons, ships, vehicles, and essential provisions. These vital resources were not merely for American forces, but also for Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and every other allied nation. By 1944, the United States was producing approximately half of the entire world's economic output, a staggering 50%, with the rest of the world combined generating the other half. Furthermore, America held a commanding 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. It commanded the largest navy, the largest air force, and within a year would possess nuclear weapons. No nation in recorded history had ever attained such comprehensive and swift dominance. The American negotiators at Bretton Woods, led by the astute Harry Dexter White, were acutely aware of the formidable hand they held. The British delegation, in contrast, was headed by John Maynard Keynes, widely regarded as the most brilliant economist of the 20th century. Keynes arrived with an intriguing proposition to establish a new international currency, which he dubbed the Bancor. The idea was that no single nation would own this currency. International trade would instead be settled in Bancors, thus ensuring that no country enjoyed a structural advantage. It was an elegant and genuinely neutral concept, yet it was summarily rejected by the Americans. For why? They reasoned. Would America agree to a neutral system when it could instead establish one built explicitly around its own currency, the dollar? In 1944, with much of Europe lying in ruins and the world still embroiled in war, a remarkable gathering took place. 730 delegates from 44 nations convened at a resort hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. There, they embarked on an unprecedented endeavor, designing a global financial system entirely from first principles. Their profound decisions would dictate the mechanisms of international trade, the relationships between currencies, how nations would settle their debts, and crucially, who would preside at the very heart of this new order. The meeting spanned 3 weeks, yet the resolutions forged during that brief period continue to shape our lives today, even if the true significance of Bretton Woods remains obscure to many. What Bretton Woods truly signified was this: America had triumphed in the Second World War not once, but twice. The first victory was achieved militarily, through force of arms. The second, and arguably more profound, was a financial one. This financial triumph, quieter in its execution, proved to be far more permanent and vastly more profitable than any engagement fought on a battlefield. Allow me to illustrate precisely how this system was constructed, how it was miraculously preserved when it seemed destined for collapse, how it subsequently became a powerful geopolitical instrument, and what the ultimate implications will be when it inevitably draws to a close. To fully grasp the Bretton Woods Agreement, one must first comprehend the global landscape of 1944. Europe was utterly devastated. Britain, which had reigned as the world's preeminent financial power for 2 centuries, found itself utterly bankrupt, having exhausted its national wealth fighting the war. France was occupied and shattered, its infrastructure in tatters. Germany was on the verge of being reduced to rubble, its industrial heartland obliterated. Japan faced the imminent prospect of atomic devastation within months. A confluence of decisions, some originating from America, some global, some purely economic, and others entirely political, has begun.